He who cannot control his own heart will never hold the keys to another's. True power is the art of remaining ice while the world burns around you. For fire consumes, but cold preserves. The Stoic Strategist. There is an ancient and dangerous art hidden between the lines of history's pages, a secret that rests in the shadows of Niccolò Machiavelli's thought. Most scholars focus on politics, the conquest of kingdoms, or the manipulation of kings and armies, but they miss the most visceral essence of the teaching. There exists a much more subtle application, an art of dominating not geographic territories, but the unexplored vastness of the human heart through the flaws of the mind. We are talking about a method so dark, so forbidden and morally complex that, when applied with the precision of a surgeon, it plants a seed of invisible yet indestructible obsession in another person's soul. And a clear warning must be left before we proceed. He who dares to use this tool awakens primal psychological forces he cannot always control, for he is dealing with the fragility of another's sanity. Machiavelli never spoke of love with the naive sweetness of poets or the romanticism of troubadours. For him, love was just another form of power, perhaps the most volatile of all. He argued that, in the game of power, man must seek to be loved and feared, but he understood a brutal truth. When love is used as a weapon, fear is not the opposite of affection, but rather the poison that keeps the victim paralyzed and bound to the one who holds control. It is exactly here that the most obscure method of all begins, grounded in the creation of an overwhelming emotional dependency through the cruelest of tools, the illusion of freedom. Imagine, if you can, the figure of a man who never fully surrenders, someone who operates on the margins of emotional availability. He does not offer himself. He offers a glimpse, a fraction of his essence, a calculated word, a look that seems to penetrate the soul, a magnetic presence that alters the atmosphere of the room, and then, without warning, he disappears. This retraction is not accidental. It is the engineering of scarcity, and the fundamental law of human economy dictates that scarcity generates immediate value. His silence, heavy and impenetrable, speaks much louder than any passionate declaration could ever speak. Absence ceases to be a void and becomes a substance, a sweet poison that the other person drinks voluntarily, yearning for more. She seeks him in every corner of her routine, thinks of him incessantly, revisits every memory, desperately trying to understand what she did wrong to cause such distance. But the truth, the cold and hard truth, is that he did nothing, and she did nothing wrong. He merely applied the method, letting her mind do all the heavy lifting of destruction and reconstruction. The secret of this manipulation lies in the rhythmic alternation between light and shadow, a psychological ballet where a moment of intense and warm attention is brutally followed by a calculated and surgical coldness. A subtle compliment that elevates the ego is followed by an indifference that crushes it. Machiavelli, in his cynical wisdom, would say that power is born of uncertainty. For when someone believes they possess you, the enchantment dies instantly, suffocated by security. On the other hand, when someone fears losing you, when possession is uncertain, obsession is born. The true master of power knows exactly how to keep this fire lit. feeding it with enough oxygen to burn, but never enough to explode, all without ever burning himself in the flames he created. But there is something even deeper, a subconscious level that Machiavelli accessed instinctively. He knew that desire is born from the violent contrast between what is shown and what is hidden. The human mind is biologically programmed to be attracted to mystery. The unknown is not just intriguing, it is the golden prison of the curious soul. Thus, the practitioner of this method does not reveal who he truly is. He becomes a puzzle, showing only fragments of his personality like broken mirrors on the floor. Every gesture is rehearsed, every word is studied to suggest a depth that perhaps does not even exist, something that is never completely delivered. The empty space left by this lack of information forces the other person to fill the gaps with their own imagination. And here lies the real danger. What is born from the victim's imagination is infinitely stronger and more idealized than any raw reality could be. From this point on, the game transforms into an almost religious ritual. She begins to chase him mentally, transforming into a detective of her own emotions, trying to decipher what she feels, trying to discover the secret code that makes him act in that distant way. She seeks signs in the vacuum, interprets silences as coded messages, reads deep meanings where there is absolutely nothing. And the more she tries to understand his logic, the more she loses herself in her own emotional labyrinth. The secret of the method is, in fact, frighteningly simple. Give enough to awaken a ravenous hunger, but deny enough so that this hunger is never, ever satisfied. Machiavelli said that he who controls the emotions of others controls the world, and there is no emotion more powerful, more corrosive, and more motivating than doubt. Doubt is desire disguised as anguish. It is doubt that makes the mind return to the same point obsessively, even when the body and reason want to leave and protect themselves. When a woman feels there is something to be conquered, an enigma to be solved, but does not know exactly what it is in this moment of confusion that the noose tightens around her neck. She becomes a prisoner, not of him, but of the uncontrollable impulse to discover the truth. This is the most dangerous and refined point of the method. It transforms the other into a mirror of their own insecurities and desires. Every time she thinks of him, in truth, she is not seeing him. She is thinking of herself, projecting into his void what she wants, what she fears, what she lost in her own history. The Machiavellian manipulator does not need to order, does not need to shout, nor much less beg for attention. He merely plants the thorn of curiosity in the flesh of her mind and lets it grow, infecting every thought. And one day, when she finally realizes the depth of the hole into which she has fallen, she will no longer know how to distinguish if she desires him ardently or fears him deeply. The human mind is incredibly fragile in the face of prolonged uncertainty. When someone offers us security and predictability, the heart calms down and, eventually, gets bored. But when someone offers mystery, the heart goes mad, adrenaline spikes, and dependency forms. Machiavelli understood this fundamental principle and transformed it into a weapon of emotional war. He realized that real power does not reside in being loved, a passive position, but in being necessary, an active and dominant position. And no one is more necessary than the one who holds the key to resolve the emotional confusion he himself created. The practitioner of this method becomes a controlled storm in the victim's life. He approaches with overwhelming intensity, making her feel as if the world revolved only around her, raising her to a divine pedestal. And then, without any logical explanation, he retreats into the shadows. He disappears, leaving a void that screams louder than any word of farewell. She asks herself agonizingly if she did something wrong, if she lost something, if she ceased to be enough. In this instant of extreme vulnerability, he possesses her, not with the body, which is vulgar and temporary, but with thought, which is eternal and omnipresent. Silence becomes the invisible chain that binds her to him. What Machiavelli taught in his cold analysis of human nature is that we are moved by two primordial impulses, fear and desire. And the true master, the artist of manipulation, is the one who knows how to balance the two in a perfect dose. The fear of losing what one desires is the most efficient prison ever created by human architecture. Therefore, the Machiavellian never surrenders everything he has or everything he feels. He gives pleasure and immediately withdraws it before satisfaction occurs, offers love and immediately denies it, shows affection and then falls silent in a disturbing mutism. Every gesture is coldly calculated to light the fire of doubt and keep it burning slowly, consuming her rationality. She begins to relive every instant, dissecting every touch, analyzing the intonation of every word spoken. The past transforms into a mental labyrinth where she runs in circles, trying to decipher his intentions. But the terrible secret is that there is no hidden intention. There is only control. He becomes the center of her enigma, the perfect mirror of her deepest needs. She may come to hate him for making her wait, for making her suffer, but paradoxically, this only makes her desire him even more. Anger mixes with attraction in an explosive chemical cocktail, and love becomes irremediably confused with pain. This is the alchemy of emotional power in its purest form. Machiavelli knew that whoever awakens contradictory emotions in another human being gains absolute dominion over them, for the mind cannot process dissonance and desperately seeks a resolution. Pure love is calm, predictable, and safe. But love mixed with fear is addictive. It is a heavy drug. It is emotional chaos that creates chemical dependency in the brain. When she does not know if he loves her or despises her, she feels alive, electric, vigilant. Uncertainty is the high-octane fuel of obsessive passion. But attention, the method does not work only with words or external attitudes. It requires the construction of an aura. The practitioner needs to appear unfathomable, like a deep and dark ocean. He must move in the world with the confidence of someone who knows something no one else knows, a bearer of universal secrets. His look must contain unrevealed mysteries, and his smile must suggest a silent danger, a promise of risk. He must transmit in every pore the sensation that he does not need anyone to survive or be happy. And it is precisely because of this radical self-sufficiency that everyone desires him desperately. Machiavelli would say that power belongs to the one who has the capacity to walk away first, to the one who is willing to leave. He who does not depend dominates, and this is the pulsing heart of the forbidden method, making the other need you infinitely more than you need them, creating an invisible asymmetry, but heavy as lead, in the scale of the relationship. She clings, seeking security. You observe, impassive. She surrenders, opening her defenses. You decide, keeping yours closed. In the game of emotion, the rule is clear and brutal. Who feels more, loses. With time, the bond becomes ritualistic, almost sacred to her. She dreams of him, imagines encounters that never happened, creates entire dialogues in her head where he finally opens up. His absence transforms into the greatest of all presences in her life. The simple act of not being there makes him omnipresent, infiltrated in every thought. It reaches a point where he no longer needs to do anything, absolutely nothing. The method becomes self-sustaining, a perpetual motion of desire and pain. Her own desire feeds it. She becomes the jailer and the guardian of her own captivity. And it is here that the danger reaches its dramatic peak, because all obsession is, at its core, a form of adoration. But it is also a form of imminent destruction. The manipulator who completely dominates someone's heart runs the risk of being swallowed by the very spell he cast. Absolute power always charges a high price, and when the victim, driven to the extreme, transforms into a hunter, the game can reverse with violence. True power, Machiavelli said, lies not in dominating physical bodies, but in dominating perceptions, the way the other sees reality. He who controls the meaning of things controls that person's world. And in the field of human relations, whoever defines what love is, what rejection is, and what loss is, controls the mind of the other. The dark method acts precisely on this blind and invisible spot, on the redefinition of the concept of love. The practitioner of the method does not show himself as a vulgar conqueror seeking validation. He presents himself as a rare presence, a comet, unpredictable and magnetic. Every word he utters seems to carry the weight of a sentence. Every silence seems to hide a state secret. He awakens in her the sensation that the simple act of being noticed by him, even for a second, is a divine gift. And thus, the woman begins to measure her own human worth by the quantity of attention, or the lack of it, that he offers. The control has already begun. The web is already woven, but she believes piously that it is just the beginning of a beautiful love story. This is how the fatal confusion is born. Love is confused with nervous tension. Passion is confused with pain. Desire is confused with fear of loss. The Machiavellian manipulator understands a biological truth. The human being does not seek only pleasure and happiness. He seeks intensity. He wants to feel. And what is more intense than the paradoxical mixture between pleasure and suffering? It is this paradox that addicts, the same mechanism that makes people return to those who hurt them, only to feel something they consider real. The method does not promise happiness. Happiness is lukewarm, but it promises emotion. It promises fire, and this is sufficient to trap any mind that is bored with normality. Little by little, he becomes the black sun of her emotional universe. Everything he does or fails to do acquires a hidden, mystical meaning. A delayed response on the cell phone turns into a sign of disinterest or punishment. A distant look during a dinner turns into proof that something is wrong. Her mind begins to operate in a loop around a single torturous question. What does he feel for me? And it is exactly in this moment of supreme doubt that the manipulator wins the war. Because while she spends all her vital energy seeking to understand, he merely observes, saving his own. He does not need to chase, does not need to prove anything. She does all the emotional work for him. Machiavelli would say that the secret of domination lies in making the other act voluntarily in your favor, believing it is for their own good. And when someone begins to justify themselves, to explain themselves excessively, to humiliate themselves for crumbs of attention, the battle is already lost. The white flag has already been hoisted. The Machiavellian creates emotional chaos deliberately, and afterwards offers crumbs of calm, like a benevolent king granting favors to a desperate subject. He becomes at the same time the disease and the cure, the poison and the antidote. And she, even if in moments of lucidity she is conscious of the game, cannot free herself because the primitive mind does not desire what is logical. It desires what is intense and what guarantees the survival of the bond. But there is a second level, deeper and more dangerous, where manipulation becomes brainwashing. When the manipulator realizes she is totally ensnared, he begins to mold her beliefs and her self-image. Through subtle phrases, he plants ideas like viruses. No one understands you like I do. Only I see who you really are. You feel this so intensely because you are different from the others. These are apparently innocent affirmations, validations of the ego, but each of them digs deeper the tunnel of dependency and isolation. She starts to see the world exclusively through his eyes. The outside world loses color, friends lose importance, and he becomes the only lighthouse in the darkness. Time begins to distort in her perception. Days without contact seem like months of torture. Any minimal gesture of his turns into a divine sign of hope. Her brain, now conditioned as in a laboratory experiment, seeks dopamine in his unpredictability like a powerful chemical addiction. Machiavelli never spoke about dopamine or neuroscience, but his intuition about human nature would have understood this mechanism perfectly. Power is, in the last analysis, neurochemical. Unpredictability is the whip that keeps her in constant motion. And the manipulator knows exactly when to pull away to increase desire, to the boiling point. He understands that strategic disappearance is more effective than any active seduction technique. The void makes him an unreachable myth. Absence transforms him into a living legend. And when he finally reappears, the reunion is apotheotic, almost religious. Her brain explodes in relief, love, and fear, a torrent of neurotransmitters. The cycle restarts, obsession grows deeper roots, and she, without realizing, no longer seeks the man of flesh and bone. She seeks the overwhelming emotion he represents. But Machiavelli's darkest method does not end in conquest. It culminates in absolute detachment, in final coldness. The manipulator is only invincible as long as he does not need the result, as long as he does not care. Power is born of coldness, and coldness is the supreme proof that he dominates himself before dominating the other. Machiavelli warned, "He who wants to be feared and loved at the same time must be prepared to be hated." It is at this point that the game rises to an almost spiritual level, where emotional control transforms into a macabre art form. He is no longer a man trying to conquer a woman. He is a strategist, molding the invisible battlefield that exists in the space between two hearts. He knows that her obsession is merely a reflection of her own insecurity, and that desire only exists as long as there is distance and obstacles. Thus, he keeps the mystery artificially alive. He never explains his actions, never justifies his disappearances, never surrenders completely. With every gesture, he reaffirms his unshakable independence. With every absence, he reinforces his inestimable value. With every reunion, he does not resolve the tension, he reignites the fire of doubt. His power is silent because it comes from the cynical perception that love, when uncontrolled, is just dependency disguised as romanticism. And whoever has the key to awaken this dependency dominates the soul. She seeks him, tries to understand him, dreams of him, analyzes every detail. But the more she idealizes him, the less she knows the real man. The Machiavellian method transforms her into a priestess of an invisible cult, the cult of uncertainty. She adores him and curses him in the same prayer, loves him and fears him, desires him and hates him with the same intensity. And it is in this chaos that the bond solidifies like steel. He observes calmly, like a satiated predator, knowing that the secret lies in not reacting. His strength is infinite patience, the cold look that does not yield to emotional pressure, that does not blink. He understands that true dominion is not conquered with shouts, brute force, or empty promises, but with strategic silence and tactical absence. His silence is the mirror where she projects everything she feels, seeing her own demons. His absence is the altar where she offers her daily thoughts. It is the perfect prison, built without walls, without bars, sustained only by her own mind. And then comes the last movement of the method, the checkmate, the complete and inexplicable disappearance. The manipulator withdraws without warning, without goodbye, leaving only the echo of his presence. He does not end the relationship, does not explain why, does not give the closure that the human psyche needs so much, because the end closes the enchantment. But doubt eternizes it. She spends days, months, perhaps years, trying to understand what happened, reliving the mystery. Time does not erase what was never resolved, what was left open. And that is why the forbidden method is the most powerful of all. It transforms memories into ghosts that never die, haunting the victim forever. Machiavelli knew that memory is the most fertile ground for lasting power. The forgotten enemy is defeated and dead. The enemy remembered every day wins eternally, achieves immortality. In the same way, the man who leaves a deep emotional mark does not need to be physically present. He lives, renting a permanent space in the woman's mind. She recreates him in dreams, sees him in songs, recognizes his features in the looks of strangers on the street. He becomes an archetype, a symbol, a curse, a name whispered in the darkest corners of her soul. But there is a final paradox, a poetic justice. The practitioner who dominates the other also approaches his own perdition. For power, when absolute, isolates completely. The manipulator becomes a prisoner of his own mask, unable to remove it. He cannot love without losing control, and losing control is his greatest fear. He cannot surrender without stripping himself of the mystery that confers power upon him. The method makes him a god for a fleeting instant, but makes him lonely for all eternity. It is the high price of manipulation, the inner void, and yet he smiles in the shadows, because Machiavelli never promised happiness to his disciples. He promised power, and power in its purest and most crystalline form is the capacity to move hearts without touching them, to ignite minds without saying a single word. When she chases him in silence, when she hates him and desires him at the same time, when she cannot forget him nor replace him, that is when the method has reached absolute perfection. In the end, the man who dominates the emotions of another human being is not a victorious conqueror, but a cold mirror. He reflects the abyss that exists inside each of us. And whoever looks too deep into this mirror inevitably loses themselves forever. Machiavelli knew from the beginning, love is just one of the masks of power, and power, when used in the shadows, creates gods and demons in the same measure.